pleasure to be here and helping Geospatial Media to sponsor both the whole GeoSmart this year and this session today around GeoBuild and tomorrow. So I think the challenges for India around trying to implement the smart city concept are fascinating to see how this is going to evolve over the next 1, 2, 5 and 10 years. And I think it's going to be very interesting for those of us who are involved in it to see how this moves forward. So what I'd like to do this morning is just give some very high level views on smart cities in general, why they're happening around the world, show some examples of what we're seeing in other cities around the world, and then narrow that down into what do I think that means for India, what's the potential vision of where this could take us, and then what I think are the success factors that are going to enable India to be successful in the implementation of smart cities over the next few years. So why are smart cities happening? If we look around the world, we're basically seeing that the world population is growing. So the expectation is that by 2050, there will be more than 10 billion people in the world. Now, to put that into the context of us in this room today, if you are 30 or around 30, then you're probably going to see the world population double in your lifetime, which is significant. If you're like me, in your early 50s, you're going to see the world population triple in my lifetime, which to me is an incredible fact that this growth is happening. So how do we manage that? How does society manage that? There's numerous challenges with managing that significant population growth, and we're seeing those challenges come to the forefront in many parts of the world. The second part is that the world has now become urban. Since 2008, there are more people living in cities than there are living in rural areas. I think when we look at India, as we narrow that down to the Indian market, when I did the statistics myself over the weekend, the numbers are staggering. That today approximately 27 to 30% of the Indian population lives in cities. By the end of 2030, that number is going to be approximately 40%. That is, if my maths is right, around another 230 to 240 million people living in urban cities in the next 14 years in India. So the challenge is, how do you manage that growth in the population living in those cities? How are we going to manage the infrastructure that needs to support that population? So again, I think part of the Indian government has recognized those challenges and is now thinking about how it can move forward to start to put that smart city concept in place to enable that or to facilitate that population migration into the urban areas. The third one, obviously, is cities around the world are under pressure. We've been talking this morning, and anybody who lives in India knows the challenges of getting around Delhi, of getting around Mumbai, just the challenges on the transportation system. There's significant challenges on the utilities, whether that's the provision of energy, gas and electricity, etc., and also on water. So again, it's how do you go about building and enabling the infrastructure that can support that population growth in the urban areas. I think the other one, even reading some of the local newspapers over the weekend, is how do you provide the urban planning to enable the cities to grow in a managed way. So from my research, etc., it is clear that there's still a significant amount of property development that is taking place in the urban cities that is unplanned, unapproved, but people are building those buildings. Now that puts a significant strain on the overall infrastructure of the city. How can you manage the education, the healthcare needs, the transportation system, the water and utility systems if unapproved buildings are taking place? And a lot of these aren't small dwellings, these are starting to become high-rise buildings. So again, putting that governance process in place is going to be critical to the enablement of the development of smart cities in the future. But also, I think the other challenge we have is the vision of smart cities is fantastic, but how do you start to make that happen? In a country like India, what are the small steps you can take to start to move along the path to get there? And we'll talk about that a little more in a couple of slides. The other side of it is obviously the budgets within cities are stretched. There aren't unlimited funds available for any organization around the world to implement a lot of the infrastructure and the systems that need to be put in place to make a smart city reality. So again, how can we do more with less? How can the cities provide more services with less funding in the future? And the final one around the pressure is really, what is the expectations on the citizens? I think today, with the advent of the smart devices, citizens have a greater expectation on the immediacy of information. I want to know what's happening now. I don't want to wait a day or two. I want to see what the traffic situation looks like. You can go on with your smart device today and using the Google Maps, actually plan your journey and determine where the roads are busy and what an alternative route is. And you don't see just that here in India. Actually, in places like Sao Paulo, where the traffic is even worse than some of the traffic here in India, people use that as a navigation device with the Waze embedded in it to get around the city. But also, there's multiple ways that this device has transformed the way the citizen can interact with the government and vice versa. And it's how do we look at building that infrastructure, that capability that enables the continued adoption of that capability. And the final where is again that growth on technology. Yeah, there's billions of devices that are attached to the internet today. There are going to be even more devices attached to the internet over the next 3, 5, and 10 years. So again, so that puts some strain on the overall communications network in a city, but also it provides a lot of information around big data. A lot of information can be collected, but the critical thing is not so much how you collect the data, it's how is that data going to be used? What piece of the data do you need to solve a particular problem, and how do you extract the relevant piece of data from the total data that exists to provide the information that's needed to solve a particular problem? But I think the other great advantage that emerging nations have in this technology adoption is they can actually what I term leapfrog from a technology perspective. If you look at the Western world, Europe and the US, they've migrated over time and technologies evolved over time. I think when you come to an emerging country like India, you can leapfrog from a technology perspective. You can go from this level to this level relatively quickly if the right thought processes are put in place, the right leadership is provided, and the right execution is in place. Now, that's a huge advantage that India has moving forward for the implementation of smart cities. So that sort of gives a holistic view of why smart cities are happening around the world. So then we look at what effectively is a smart city. So Anamika has just gave a great overview of the aspects that make up a smart city. So the way we look at it is really around three main areas. The first one looks at digital, we call it digital technologies, but I think the critical thing is, how do you drive that connectivity? If you haven't got that connectivity, then you're not going to be able to implement a smart city. Running off a 3G network and slow broadband is not going to enable that integration of a smart city. You're going to need to get to 4G and high-speed broadband at some stage to enable it to happen. That's how you can get that information sharing taking place. Yes, we need smart sensors or smart systems. I think in many ways I'd actually like to replace the word smart with the word more intelligent. This is sensors or systems that can actually make decisions without human intervention. The algorithms are developed over time to say in these situations we can take this action. So if you're looking at a transportation system, why the traffic lights are set on a typical example, the traffic lights set on a regular pattern. Why can't the traffic lights gauge the volume of traffic and adapt their synchronization to the needs of the traffic flow, looking at what's happening maybe a mile or two further down the road or 2 or 3 kilometers down the road. So building in that intelligence into the system to enable a more robust digital platform for everybody to work on. And obviously open data. In terms of the overall technology, the data has to be open. There's no point having these closed systems if you want to get that connectivity and that information sharing. The second one, and we touched on this in the previous slide, is really around that smart infrastructure. It is, what do we need to do? How do we want to provide that information around energy, water usage? Is there a view that we could start to implement smart meters? Now, I have a device now where and I think Anamika mentioned this in her little presentation this morning, where I can control the heating in my property in the US through the internet from here now. If I want to change the temperature up or down, I can start to do that. The intelligence is built into the system. The system itself will actually track our movement in and out of the house. It knows when we're there, it knows what temperature we like, it knows when we're not there and can reduce the temperature. So again, the intelligence starts to be built into the sensor as opposed to me having to determine what temperature I want to have the property at. So again, you can start to look at it, how does that impact or could be implemented as part of a smart city network in India. Also looking at health and education. So now really the primary focus of these sessions was to talk about geospatial and building information modeling and construction integration into a smart city. But geospatial information can be critical to the adoption of healthcare and education facilities in a city as well. If you build in the GIS and the attributes around the demographics of the population to determine what you need from a health and an education perspective. And then you start to look at the sustainability and the efficiency, and the geospatial capabilities, the building and construction capabilities provide significant value from both a sustainability, i.e. building for the future. It's not just the design and build process, it's the operate and maintain that's a critical part of the building infrastructure as well. 60% of the cost of infrastructure is in the operate and maintain, not as opposed to the design and build phase. So it's how do you maintain that building? How do you keep it up to date over the lifetime of the asset? And the same from an efficiency perspective, utilizing the capabilities that exist today, you can reduce the cost of building major infrastructure by 20 to 30%. A significant reduction when you're trying to do more with less. And the final piece is looking at collaboration and engagement. A smart city will not work if there isn't collaboration between the stakeholders across the city, the government, industry, citizens. If that collaboration doesn't exist, a smart city can't exist. You've got to have that engagement across all the stakeholders. You've got to enable that engagement to take place. You've got to break down the silos in the government. How many, not just in India, but in organizations across the world that we talk to, each department in a city has its own database. And the database doesn't talk, none of the databases are open and talk to each other. There is no way you can implement a smart city with silos built like that in the government. So there has to be a change of attitude at the top of the organizations to make that happen. Otherwise, it will never work. There'll be a lot of money spent, a lot of time and effort spent, but the implementation will be unsuccessful. And that's where it leads into that overall transparency across the city to make it happen. So there's some significant challenges to, not just here in India, but around the world to make this implementation of smart cities happen. So what I'd like to do now is just show a couple of examples of how smart cities have been implemented around the world. So the first one I'm going to show is actually a very, very short video from Manhattan in New York. So this is at one level in terms of the level of information that is provided to the citizens. And what they do here is actually looking at the planning process over a 3 to 4 year period. And you can see and this is using Google Maps and Street View, etc. You can start to see how the buildings are going to develop. They're in the planning process over a 3 to 4 year period. So hopefully you can start to see as the buildings go up. So this is freely available to the public. So as a citizen, you can see what's happening from the utilities, etc. They know the extra demands are going to be placed on their organizations, so they can start to do the capacity planning to ensure that they can meet the needs of the city going forward. So that's a very simple view, very sophisticated in terms of the way it's integrated a lot of information, but it provides that information to the citizen. The next one I want to show is, to me, is fascinating because it's from a small village in Denmark, and here they wanted to track or determine the patterns of the kids going to school in the morning. So one of the hardest things to do in terms of this project was how do you get engagement with the teenagers in the city to actually determine their path or patterns of going to school in the morning. Now the great idea they came up with is they actually developed an app that the kids could download on their phone that would just track how they were getting to and from school in the morning. So again, great engagement from the city out to the citizens, and actually got a bunch of teenagers who are the hardest group in the world to get to do anything that you want them to do, particularly if they think Big Brother's watching them, to engage in the process. So what they could then start to do is see how they started to come to school in the morning. So you'll find in a minute there's a couple of early birds out there who are coming in very early from the remote areas. Then over time you start to see more and more kids, but you can see some are on buses, some are on bikes, some are walking, some are in cars. So they start to determine the patterns for the children coming to school in the morning. A fairly simple engagement with the citizens to help plan their routes in the routes to and from school. Then this is the overlay onto the actual onto a satellite image of the city as well. So again, just very simple ways of starting to get that engagement to start to build out the needs within the city. So Anamika again touched this morning just on the criticality of geospatial and BIM and how that can be implemented into the smart city. So let me just give a view of how that integration can happen, and then a vision if I was looking out into the future sometime as to how I really see this working in a truly smart city. So the BIM piece, I think, in terms of that building efficiency, in terms of the speed to build the building, the cost of building the building, and into the operate and maintain, integrating 3D models is critical. And the 3D model can go across the whole design, construction and operate phase. So if you start with a design from the architect, you can then lay it into a CAD model, into an engineering design. A lot of the materials can be prefabricated, whether it's steel or concrete. They don't have to be concrete cast in place. It can be prefabricated in another part of the country, brought in as needed, and put into the construction phase. The same with the steel structure. So you actually started being a more efficient construction process into that construction phase. The same through the implementing the mechanical engineering and plumbing. All that can be designed in the model. You can do the clash detection in the model, not on site. So again, you reduce the rework significantly from the construction process. But then that can be integrated into the city GIS. And the vision here should be that there is a 3D model of every city. My view of the world is at some stage, maybe not in my lifetime, the world will be seen in a 3D model across the whole world. The capability exists to make that happen today. It's a matter of time before that is actually implemented. But from a city perspective, you can start to look at where are we today, what are we putting in there, and then can you start to build that 3D model into the planning process? So rather than submitting 2D plans, as a lot of people do in the world today, why can't you submit a 3D plan that has that 3D model available for the city? That has a number of advantages. One is going into the maintenance and potentially into the emergency services, but it could also be led into a cadastral model. Why can't you have a 3D cadastral model that enables you to not just to provide a taxation on the building, but maybe a taxation per floor, depending upon what activities are happening on each floor in the building. So you can evolve a more sophisticated cadastral land management model going forward. That GIS can then lead into the IWMS, the Information Work Management System, so that goes into how is the city being managed, but also then it can work into the inhabitants, the citizens, the government services. So what information do the emergency responders need? What information do the city officials need? All that information can be held by the city, so they have a more effective way of managing the city in the future. Where are the demographics of the workforce today? Is the transportation system we have meeting the needs of the workforce today? And finally, that leads into really the people empowerment and the analytics to go around all this and enable that better decision making to take place. So that integration of all that information is critical for a city to be effective in implementation of a smart process. So if I look at a vision of the future, how you see this work, you have a 3D cadastral model. Every building's 3D model, including the indoor, the indoor of the building is mapped. That is owned by the city. That is actually sat with the first responders. So let's say there's a fire in the building, the fire people turn up, they have heads-up displays, they know the exact layout of the building because it's in the model. they can actually walk through with the heads-up displays. They know where the gas pipes are, they know where the water pipes are, they know where the electricity cables are, they know where the offices are. So it leads them to hopefully a more effective method of the rescue process if there is a serious fire. So you can provide this total integration that enables a far more effective operation within a city. So just a view of how the future is going to go and how augmented reality could be embedded into a city planning process to actually provide that visualization of how the infrastructure is going to look as it's built out through the process, but also to drive greater efficiency in that construction process. So really so from my perspective, our perspective, what do I believe are the keys to success for smart cities? The first key word is collaboration. It's collaboration between the authorities, the government, businesses, and citizens. If that collaboration doesn't exist, smart cities will not be successful. It's a collaboration between the professionals in the city, the technology and the service providers. If we can't all work together, if we don't create those open platforms and open databases for people, again, a smart city cannot be implemented. But finally, I think it needs the vision, it needs the leadership, it needs the governance, and it needs execution to enable smart cities. If we can capture those four main elements at the bottom, then smart cities in India will be successful. Thank you very much.